The Bicycle Frame Builder's Apprentice, Chapter 2. Radium Street, Ancoats, Manchester, could hardly be described as an attractive place, except by an industrial archaeologist. Situated on the first floor of an old cotton mill, Malc's frame building workshop was sublet from a friend of his, namely Jeff Warby, who specialised in stove enamelling bicycle frames and motorbike petrol tanks. Their relationship was mutually advantageous. Malc needed the services of a stove enameller, and Jeff, as well as being good at his job, was the only specialist in his field in Greater Manchester. The nearest alternative was C&G Finishes in Liverpool. At the same time, Jeff required the services of a frame builder. Customers who decided to have their favourite frames re-enamelled sometimes asked for small modifications, requiring silver soldering and brazing to be made. Those involved in crashes often required dents filled, tubes replaced, and other repair work done that demanded the skills of a frame builder. Moreover, cyclists tended to renovate their frames during the winter months, when the demand for new frames was at its lowest. The 27th of December was a Friday, and Malc arrived at the premises at 9 o'clock. He'd arranged that Jack O'Donnell should bring the two girls in at 10. In the meantime, he decided to tidy up the workshop, a job he was prone to neglect. "It looks as though there's been a war," Jack laughed. Ancoats came as a shock to many a Mancunian. Large sections of the area resembled a bomb site. To a young farmer's lass from rural Hayfield, a village whose own mills and textile printing works had long since been demolished or tarted up, it must have seemed extraordinarily dirty, ugly, and neglected. "It does a bit, doesn't it, Connie? However, the fact is, this is one of the most important sites in Britain's industrial history. It's a disgrace that it's been allowed to fall into such a state." "What do you mean, Grandad?" Rosie asked. They were walking down Jersey Street, a wasteland of rubble to their left, obviously not the result of recent demolition, indicated long-term neglect. A complex of tall, ancient, and somewhat decrepit mills, some 8 stories tall, shut out the light to their right. Then the scene changed, with equally tall mills on their left, plunging the narrow street into deep shadow. "These are McConnell's mills," he informed them, nodding to his right. They were built in 1790 by Scottish migrants. The next lot on this side were built shortly after by another Scottish family, the Murrays. They are the oldest cotton spinning mills still standing in Manchester, although they stopped spinning cotton here decades ago. "But why are they so important, Grandad?" Ancoats was the first industrial suburb in the world's first industrial city. This is where the Industrial Revolution really took off. The men, women and children who slaved in those mills propelled Britain to the forefront of world trade and world influence. It was on their backs that the Napoleonic Wars were financed and fought, and the British Empire was extended to the east. Thanks to mechanisation, by the 1840s, the cotton masters were accumulating wealth on a scale hitherto unknown in all the history of all the peoples of the world. But those who designed and built and operated their mills and their machinery, and thus made it all possible, lived in abject poverty. Wages were so low, all members of the family had to work, including children, some as young as 6 years of age, up to the 1820s, when they raised the minimum age to 9. The cotton masters claimed it kept them off the streets. The Chartist movement, the fight of the common people to have the right to vote, began here in 1838, and in 1842 Manchester was the centre of Britain's first general strike and the struggle for the 10-hour working day. The suffragette movement, the campaign for women's right to vote, began here. Such was the influence of this area by the 1860s. Cotton textiles on every inhabited continent were known as Manchester cloth. The textile industry also led to Manchester and Salford becoming a major engineering, railway and chemical manufacturing centre. In many ways, this area was the cradle of it all. And look at it now. The money grubbers had bled it dry and left it to its fate, just as they bled the workers dry in the so-called good old days. He shook his mane of white hair in heartfelt disgust, and then, having delivered his impromptu history lesson, turned into a narrow lane between the two complexes comprising Murray's Mills. Halfway down this roadway on their left, they came to a high, arched gateway, which led into a large courtyard open to the sky. He led them across the yard to a flight of iron steps, leading up to a closed wooden door in the far right-hand corner. They climbed to the top, and Jack pushed the door open. He led them into a room illuminated by fluorescent tubes. Two great metal cabinets, which the girls later learned were stove-in hammering ovens, stood to their left. Next to them, on overhead rails, an array of frames and forks in a variety of colours were suspended on hooks, and on two adjacent tables, a collection of motorbike petrol tanks awaited attention. In the far corner, straight ahead, stood a wooden structure with a window and an open door, which had once comprised an office. Malc appeared and greeted them as if they were long-lost friends. Back in Hayfield, the sky was a clear, pale, wintry blue, the air crisp and frost abundant. Ralph and his father, assisted by Ralph's two elder brothers and their dogs, had been gathering their flock of Scottish black-faced sheep from the higher plateau of Kinder Scout throughout the morning. In normal circumstances, the sheep would have been left to make their own way down to the lower slopes as the winter cold began to take hold, but these were not normal times. Sheep thieves had been active in the area since the previous November, and the Gartsides had not been exceptions to their depredations. Ralph's Manchester Terrier, Titch, had participated in the proceedings. Although the breed had been developed for the specific task of ratting, Titch's upbringing on the farm and his interactions with collies had made him as useful a work dog as any when necessity demanded his services. With the bulk of the flock safely grazing on the low slopes where they could easily be seen from the farmyard, they finally made their way back home. Elsie looked up as they entered the kitchen. "You look absolutely frozen, lads. Get by the fire. Jed, put kettle on, and I'll make a fresh brew." The farmer did as instructed, but Jem shook his head. "I'm going to have to go, mother. I've been at it since 5 this morning, and I'm working tonight in quarry. I'm in need of 40 winks." "I can't stay either, Mum," Richard concurred. "I've promised to take our lasses to Buxton." "All right," Elsie responded reluctantly. "But give my love to the kids, Richard, and to that lad of yours too, Jem. Tell Brenda and Dora we must get together soon." Jem laughed. The old family had spent Christmas Day together, as they did every year. Nonetheless, he knew his mother loved the role of grandmother and matriarch. "What about New Year's Day? Let's all go to Rambler or the Nag's Head for a slap-up lunch, my treat. You deserve a rest, mother, and the kids'll love it." "Sounds good to me," Jed confirmed. Young Ralph echoed his sentiments, as did Richard. "I don't mind cooking. It's the least I can do for my family," Elsie began to protest, but her eldest son's frown and rather stern expression stopped her in her tracks. She returned his look, shook her head, and finally caved in. "Okay, have it your own way, Jem. I must admit it's something to look forward to." With that, Jem and Richard left to return to their respective families in Bradwell. Ralph, meanwhile, had taken the hint, and was busy shoveling tea into the pot as his father waited for the kettle to whistle. Titch had already retreated to his privileged place of honour on the flock mat in front of the fire, more than content with his lot after his earlier endeavours on the moor. Jack O'Donnell and his 2 young charges were making their way back home, walking along Redhill Street, the Rochdale Canal, to their left. Malc accompanied them, pushing his bike. Connie had rather hoped he'd have been on the tandem, for then she'd have had a chance to persuade him to transport her back to Edgeley. Unfortunately, he cycled to work on his touring bike. Both girls had learnt a lot from their visit, although Rosie hadn't spent much time in the mill. She persuaded Grandad to help her search for a particular church in Ancoats. When she was younger, Grandad had read to her every night before she fell asleep, and one of her favourite authors happened to be Alan Garner. In one of his books, 3 children had travelled into Manchester from their home in Burnage. They came across a large metal glass-fronted case containing a street map in Piccadilly, designed to provide visitors with detailed information as to their whereabouts. Having given the handle, which scrolled the map up and down, a spin, they discovered every street in Ancoats. The name had intrigued them, and they'd gone on to find it. One of the lads had kicked his football, which had sailed into a derelict church. On entering to retrieve the ball, they suddenly found themselves emerging into a strange medieval world named Elidor. The story had intrigued Rosie, and the visit to Ancoats had refreshed her memory. Consequently, she insisted Grandad should take her in search of every street. He had done as she asked, leaving Connie to learn some more of the art and science of bicycle frame construction without distraction. Unfortunately, although they eventually discovered every street, the church had disappeared, yet another victim of the decay and neglect prevalent in the area. Connie had been more than happy with Rosie's desire to seek the entrance to the mysterious fantasy world of Elidor, and thus leave her alone. She was determined to take advantage of the situation presented to her. She needed to pick Malc's brains and take advantage of his practical skills, if she was to advance her desire to build herself a bicycle frame. But there was more at stake than that. She was still smarting from being left out of Rosie's and Ralph's plans to make and sell sledges and walking sticks, and was determined to show she too could play a useful and productive role. The frame builder's reaction to her first design drawing had been more than encouraging. He'd rechecked her body measurements and found those she'd detailed on the drawing to be accurate. This hadn't surprised her too much, because she followed the instructions in the book he had lent her very carefully. She had, however, made one simple mistake in the frame design, which Malc had pointed out to her. As a result, he'd advised that the frame's top tube needed to be 10mm longer, which meant a slight change in both the frame's head angle and its fork rate. More importantly, he'd explained in detail how she'd gone wrong. So now she not only knew what to avoid in future, but also realised that she had not been in error in the rest of her calculations. This in turn had given her greater confidence in her own abilities. Despite this positive development, Malc had dealt one blow to her immediate ambitions. Much to her consternation, he told her she would be wasting her time building a made-to-measure frame for her own use. Why not? It's the best way I can prove to the others I'll make a useful member of their team. I have to prove to them I can play a useful part in their enterprise. They just won't take me seriously. He'd shaken his head, but smiled encouragement with his eyes. They'll want you to be part of the team, don't worry about that, Connie. But you're still growing, and in the next couple of years, you'll no doubt shoot upwards. What's the use of building a frame that will most probably be far too small for you before you've had a chance to enjoy it? A made-to-measure frame, properly looked after, will last a lifetime. Wait till you're fully grown before you build it. Connie had gazed at him, lost for words. She wanted to protest, but she quickly realised his advice made sense. But what can I do? I don't just want to prove I can do the work. I want to be a cyclist like you. I can't wait until I've grown. He'd laughed at that point, and then sought to calm her. I'm building a frame for a mate of mine. I'll pick you up on the tandem in the morning. You can help me and learn as you're going along. How long are you here for? I'm going back to Hayfield on New Year's Eve. Right, that gives us until Monday night. Are you willing to work tomorrow and Sunday? Yes, of course. I need to learn as much as I can. He smiled once more. In that case, I'll phone Ralph on Monday evening and tell him how you've progressed. I'll also give you some test pieces to take back, and I'll ask Ralph to teach you to bronze weld. Naturally, Connie had been over the moon, but Malc had a further card up his sleeve, which he wasn't about to reveal. When they reached the junction of Reddell Street and Great Ancoats Street, the frame builder announced he had to leave them. They made their farewells and watched him cycle off before crossing the busy main road, heading for nearby Piccadilly railway station and the train back to Edgeley. Both girls satisfied with their day out in the dismal industrial slum, although for differing reasons.